It was important to meet in person, so there can be no mistake about or misrepresentations about what I wanted to communicate. I did what I came to do.
It was substantive, it was concrete, and it took place in an atmosphere that was geared toward achieving results.
American President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin have held their first much ballyhooed summit meeting in Geneva. And what's the story of that summit? Well, it's really two stories. The first is the story of the atmospherics of their meeting, which clearly were positive, surprisingly so, in fact. The second is the story of the substance of their meeting, where it's not at all clear that things were quite as positive. First, the atmospherics. It was striking how both leaders emerged describing their meeting in positive terms. President Putin called President Biden an experienced and professional leader and even had good words to say about the advice Mr. Biden once got from his mother. He said essentially Joe Biden is a man of good moral character.
It shows the extent of his moral values, and that's all quite attractive. And what I think is, on the whole, we spoke the same language.
That was striking, given that President Biden at one point recently said he agreed that President Putin could fairly be described as a killer, and that he said once he didn't see a soul inside him. It also wasn't clear how the Putin-Biden personal relationship might suffer in comparison to the admiration the Russian leader seemed to feel for the previous American president, Donald Trump. On the Biden side, the U.S. president said the conversation was direct and matter-of-fact, lacking in emotion, and he meant that in a good way, and devoid of threats. He said he succeeded in his main goal, which was to be sure President Putin knew where he was coming from when he expressed criticism of Russian action.
I told President Putin my agenda is not against Russia or anyone else. It's for the American people.
These good atmospherics extended to include an agreement to return American and Russian ambassadors to each other's capitals after an absence of several months amid rising tensions, and the two leaders agreed their governments would discuss a prisoner exchange that could return some Americans that President Biden says are being wrongly imprisoned in Russia. On substance, though, the outcome seemed more mixed. The two leaders agreed to set up a working group on cyber attacks, but President Putin defiantly denied a Russian role in cyber attacks and in recent ransomware cases, despite ample evidence some of them do emanate from Russia. He even suggested more cyber attacks come from the U.S. than from Russia, raising the question of how far that working group can get.
Most of the cyber attacks in the world are carried out from the cyber realm of the United States. In second place is Canada. Afterwards, Latin American countries, and then comes Great Britain. Russia's not on the list.
Meanwhile, President Biden said the Russian leader knows the U.S. has considerable cyber power of its own and can use it in response to further attacks. The two men agreed to start a bilateral dialogue on strategic stability, probably including arms control, but without a lot of specifics, and there's a long road to travel there. President Putin threw human rights questions back at the U.S. by blaming dissident Alexei Navalny for his own arrest.
This person knew that he was breaching the laws effective in Russia. He should have noted that as a person who was convicted 2 times.
And pretending his problems with political opponents at home were somehow comparable to the problem the U.S. had when a mob attacked the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. President Biden, for his part, pledged he will continue to raise human rights in Russia.
Human rights is going to always be on the table, I told him. It's not about just going after Russia when they violate human rights. It's about who we are.
There were some good words about working towards similar goals on Afghanistan, on Iran's nuclear program, and on humanitarian aid to Syria, but again, no specifics and a long ways to go to close the gap between rhetoric and reality. The bottom line, President Biden acknowledged what is usually the case with these meetings. The real concrete results can't be known immediately, but will take months or even years to determine.
Let's see what happens. You know, as that old expression goes, the proof of the pudding's in the eating. We're going to know shortly.